So today we are, like Linda said, we're going to get a couple of things done together. We're going to identify what matters most. We are going to define success, specifically what it looks like to you. And then we're going to build a boundary together. You're going to do that for yourself, and I'll teach you how and a system to keep it, not just for this boundary, but for others as well. So everything here today and all the content is highlighted in my newly released book, Values First, How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want. Really excited that this is out. And what I love about the book is the practical application. So you're going to see that in the framework today. And I'd suggest, while it's still on sale, go grab it for 99 cents on Amazon. And then the real magic is in the workbook. We're going to take and pull things from the workbook today. You can get that for free. I'll tell you about that later, but that's available as well. Over 50 pages of action-packed worksheets to take action. So in our time today, we're going to start with the Values First framework. So this is the framework that I use to coach individuals just like yourselves to reach their potential and lead through their values and through their authentic leadership. It's an easy to remember acronym. It spells values, right? So it's values first, audit time, life boundaries, uplifting others, experiencing conflict, and sustaining values. And it starts with what matters most. What matters to you, your core values. So that's where we're going to start today. We're going to start today. Before we can build the boundaries, we need to tie it to something that's most important. So we're going to go through an exercise of identifying those here in a minute. After that, within the framework, you audit your time. We're not going to dig into that as much today, but I urge you to do that in the workbook later on your own time. And then after that, within the framework, we start building boundaries after you've identified and dug in on what matters most. Throughout the framework, you also learn about uplifting others, how modeling your own boundaries can be a motivation for others. You're leaders, you're inspiring others, you're modeling others, you're giving others permission to do the same. It's a very powerful thing, modeling your own boundaries. You can also use the framework to understand and get ready for conflict, because it's not when or if, but it is when conflict arises. You will experience conflict, and you can use this framework to help navigate through that conflict, to have difficult conversations through these situations. And then lastly, the framework teaches you how to sustain it. I'm all about building systems to help you sustain. So this is not a one and done kind of thing. This is a method that you can use as your career evolves, as your values evolve and grow. This grows with you. So first, let's get down to it. It is called, in the book I say, it's called Values First for a reason, right? So let's start there. So this is going to be an individual exercise. So I want you to grab a pen, something to write on, whether it's a physical pen and paper, or grab your phone, put it in notes. But I want you, I'm going to give you 2 prompts. So first, take a minute and think about a time that you were at your best. What did it feel like? And what were you doing? What were you wearing even? What was the situation? Those days at work that you're just like, I love my job, or the time that you're just so fulfilled. What was that like? I'm going to give you a minute to do that, and I'll pause here. The next thing that I want you to think about is think about a time that you were uncomfortable, a time that didn't really sit right in your gut. What was that like, and how did you feel? This is kind of the opposite of the other situation, of the other scenario. And it may seem counterintuitive to think about a negative experience when trying to figure out what matters most. But what I find is that sometimes it's in that discomfort, that space that it doesn't feel great, that's where you find that clarity. Because negative emotions or experiences can be a signal to you of what's important. And if that is not getting met, if that need's not getting met, then it's going to feel uneasy or uncomfortable. So what did that uncomfort feel like? What was that situation? I'll pause here so you can spend a minute journaling on this prompt. All right, so we are going to go to the next part we're going to identify some values. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to pull some themes from what you just wrote for your 2 prompts. And I'll give you an example. So when I was answering the question, when I was at my best, what did that look like? I wrote about a day that I had in a job when I was a director, and I was in a one-on-one coaching session with them, and I was learning about the business, and I was asking them questions, and it was a one-on-one coaching engagement. And I just loved that day so much because I got to learn from somebody. I got to help them identify something, to give them the next step. I asked them a question and it led them to self-discovery. And I was an executive coach in that moment. And so in that, I pulled from that list a value of development. When I am developing others, that is what matters most to me. So I pulled development for that. So don't worry about picking the right word, I would say. Pick ones that feel good. This is an iterative process. These don't have to be perfect right now. You can come back to some of these. You're just getting started. You can revisit some of these later. And if you don't see a word, obviously these are not all of the values. If it's a phrase that you resonate most with, or if it's a similar word, but a different one than what's on the screen, just write that down. And what we're trying to do is to get to 5 to 7 words that align with some of those answers to those prompts. So pick out some that feel good right now. And what I'm going to invite you to do in chat in just a minute is to share some of your values. So these are some of your values. So mine, I have 6 values. So family is my first one. Development that I just described. I have my third one is growth, and that's development for myself. The 4th is achievement. The 5th one is advocacy, and my 6th one is balance. So those 6 are my core values. So I would invite you next to share what yours are in chat. I'd love to see what your values are, what matters most to you. The next question I have for you is about the process. What was this process like? Do you have any aha moments just on the process of getting to your values? If you're like me in my career, I have taken, 1 million assessments, right? And some of these have a component of values or motivators. But I love this analog method just because it's very simple and I can, answer a few questions. That didn't take us very long, right? That we spent a little bit of time of self-reflection to get to some of these. So what was that process like? Was it easy? Was it hard? Any aha moments or insights for anyone that you'd like to share, either in the chat or come off of mute? All right, so you have a version, maybe your first draft of your core values. And I do implore you, you can sit with these, think with these. We're going to test some of these here in a minute with our next thing that we're going to do. Okay, I'm going to ask you to pick one value that is either the most pressing or maybe potentially the one that you're not sure if you're really living into this one right now. So what might success look like to live this value? And I want to put a kind of a caveat on the word success. Success does not have to be this big, huge, aspirational thing. Success could just be, what does that one look like tactically today? It could be how you spend your time. It could be, let me give you an example. So I have a value of balance. And for me, that balance doesn't mean work-life balance. I don't think that's a thing. I think instead of work-life balance, we set priorities on what's important and you build boundaries around them, like I'm teaching you how to do that today. And for me, balance looks like, taking time for myself. It looks like feeling centered every day. It looks like taking a walk outside. It looks like getting a workout in. I like to do indoor rowing. So it looks like spending time doing things like that. So what does success look like? So to me, it's not this huge, I'm superwoman and I'm doing everything. This is very tactical. So what behaviors would living this value actually look like? Write those down for one of your values. All right, so this is I'm refreshing you on the values acronym. So we've just spent some time, an abridged version, if you will, of the values first section of our values first framework. So you've dug into what matters most, and you've spent a bit of time figuring out what that might mean for one of your values. Now, the second phase in the book is all about auditing your time. How are you actually spending your time? And then kind of overlaying your values on it. There's a ton of insights that come from this. And in the Values First workbook, there is an exercise called the Values Calendar Review that I love, that has given me so much insight. So go grab that after this call and download it so you can have it too. But now we're going to dig into the L of the values framework, which is life boundaries. And so in this section, I'm going to walk you through a 3-step process to build a boundary. But before we do that, I want to ask you, what is a boundary? I wrote an article for a magazine called Solacy, and it was in their self-care edition. And when I saw it in print, I saw this imagery that I wanted to share with you. So we talked about this process in this article. And what I love is how they depicted it. And so this imagery, the values are in the center, is the heart. So think of the heart right there as your values, and your hands around that are your boundaries. They're wrapped around them. They're kind of holding your values. So boundaries are that extra layer of protection of what matters most. And it's not really a barrier or a wall, because sometimes we think boundary is, very rigid and it's a barrier. But really, I love this imagery because it feels like an extra priority, like an act of care, like you're holding it close. And so I just wanted to share that description and that imagery for my visual learners out there, because it really resonated with me. So that's how I think about them. So if you think about the extra care that you need to give to them, how might you do that? So the first step, 3 steps in building a boundary. First one, tie it to a value. Second, set up a system. And third, we are going to celebrate our consistency. Okay, so rooting boundaries in your values help you not only identify the most important boundaries you should be keeping, but it's the motivation to actually stick to them. So this idea of intrinsic motivation to keep your boundaries, because those are the things that are important to you. You can recenter. When you're off center, I want you to recenter back into that love. What is that in the heart of it? Those are your values, the things that matter most. So first, let's build that boundary. I want you to pick one of your values. Pick one of them. Maybe it's the one you just wrote about in terms of what success looks like. If it wasn't, then I want you to pick a different one and start defining what success looks like for that value. So this, I would suggest, maybe this is the most pressing one. Maybe the value that's not getting met right now, the one that you might have most conflict in. What's most pressing or most resonating with you right now? And what does that look like for you? And on purpose, I only want you to pick one value. We are not boiling the ocean here today. And so that idea of success, that's the beginning of the boundary, right? The next question I have for you is, what's the cost of not doing it? You might be living that cost right now, right? You might be more overwhelmed. Often boundaries that I work with my coaching clients with, it's about prioritizing time, whatever it is. A lot of the things, if it's a priority, there's usually a time commitment to it. So what might that look like? And what's the cost of not doing it? So an example that I give in the book is from earlier in my career when I was a first-time mother. I was an executive at the time, and we had a new baby, and I had a long commute to the office. And by the time I got home, I would maybe see the baby for an hour before he went to bed. So I was getting home at 6:30 after the commute. And that core value that I was not meeting was family. So back then, what success meant to me was quality time, seeing him at night. And I just wasn't getting it because the commute was bad. And we lived in that house. We weren't moving at the time. So I needed to figure out something. So what was the cost of not doing it? It was literally not seeing my kid, right? And then I would be resentful. And I would miss stuff, and all the parent guilt would pile on, right? And so those were some of the things that were the cost. So I needed to set up a system. I needed to figure this thing out. So the next question I want to ask you is, what's the one thing you need to make it happen? What's the one thing you need to do to make success happen for that boundary, for that value? That's the boundary you need to build, is what I'll tell you. So what the thing that I needed to make happen in that example was I needed to leave the office early. That was back pre-pandemic. We were not doing work from home at the time. And I don't know about you, but it was hard for me to leave because at that company, FaceTime was part of the culture. I thought that I needed to be in the office to be seen. So what I needed was support. I needed support from my manager. And then I actually had to leave. I had to be the one that left the building at 4:30. So what support do you need for this boundary? Is it outsourcing something? Is it a technology? Is it extra help? Is it spending money? What is it? Is it deprioritizing something? What support might you need to build this boundary, to make that success happen for your value? Part of the system that I needed was to have a conversation with my manager. But before that, I was thinking about all of the things that I knew it's not going to work. And I want you to do the same. I want you to think of all the objections. You're probably thinking of some of the objections now, like, well, I could do this or I could do that, but that's not going to work to set up this boundary. So I call these internal and external objections. What are the things that you're telling yourself that won't let this boundary work? For me, it was things like, people won't think I'm committed to my job, or people won't think I care about doing well here, or they'll think I'm a slacker for leaving early. What are those internal objections? And then what are those external objections? So an external objection I thought about was, maybe people want to schedule meetings for me and then I wouldn't actually be available because I'd be in the car. And that wouldn't be good because I wouldn't literally be there. Or they might think that I was disagreeable because I would say, no, I can't be in this meeting or that meeting. But I want you to think about this. Take a minute or two and look at that value that you picked and those objections. The question I would ask you next is, has anyone actually told you the things that you wrote your objections about? Have you ever actually gotten feedback on any of that stuff? And what I will tell you is that no one told me that I had to be in the office until 5 or 6. No one actually told me I couldn't leave at 4:30. I didn't have one shred of feedback telling me these things. And for the leaders that I coach, I'll tell you that most of the objections that you have are internal, and most of them aren't true. So the next question I have for those are those internal objections or external objections true? Whatever that boundary is, shutting down by 7 p.m. or not working on the weekends, or, not starting the day until you get your workout in. Whatever it is, most likely your own objections are probably getting in your own way. But I also like to be prepared, right? And so as part of the system, So I want you to be prepared to deal with objections, whether they're your own or they're from others. So what might it look like to be prepared for boundary objections? I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to say no, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but I think you can prepare for it. So boundaries are not black and white, right? They're priorities. So you need to have some flexibility around it, of course, but most days, I want you to keep those boundaries more than not. These boundaries should be your default. Those are your default, okay? The boundary is not the exception. It is the default. So you might need to be prepared. So for me, I had to learn how to say no to meetings. So it meant having a literal sentence written out so that when I was going to compromise my boundary, I said, nope, I'm going to stick to my guns and I'm going to do this. And I was prepared, and I had phrases written out, literally like, no, I have a commitment at that time and I am unable to attend the meeting, right? A textbook case of no, right? So what feels good for you? What's authentic to you? And what might you need to prep in advance? Because it's not when, but again, not if, but when you're going to have to say no and be uncomfortable. But I will tell you, it gets a lot easier as you do it and as you practice this muscle. What other objections or whatever other things might be helpful for you? Put those into a system. I once coached a person that really, accountability was really important to them. And the system that they set up for their workout was paying somebody because they did not want to let them down. And they were frugal. And so they thought, hey, I'm not going to miss my workout if I'm paying for it, right? So somebody's counting on me to be there. So they put that as part of the system. So what parts of those systems do you need to include into your boundary? And then lastly, you actually have to do the boundary. You have to hold those lines. You have to give care to those values. But I don't want you to just do it. I want you to celebrate it, upholding your boundaries. I want you to celebrate that. So my background is in psychology. So, I love some positive reinforcement. And this is what that is, positive reinforcement. And sometimes, celebrating is the hardest things for my clients to do. We so often achieve big things, big or small, but we fail to celebrate it. So this is where I want you to practice celebrating it, to celebrate these boundaries, big or small. So I want you to think about it. How might you celebrate holding to your boundaries? It might be as easy as telling a close friend that, that you held to your boundaries, get a virtual high five or a real high five. It could be watching your favorite Netflix show. At the time when I still had the commute, I bought audiobooks to listen to on my shorter commute home. That was fun. Sometimes your values are rewarding in itself, right? The act of holding the boundary feels like a win, which it is. But I'd also tell you, let's celebrate consistency anyway. So here's what you can do. You can write out a list of things that you enjoy, like going for a walk, listening to music, eating outside with a friend, taking a nap, whatever it is. I'll show you my list. I have a literal list right by my desk, and it says things like read fiction. It says walk outside. It says lay down. It says write. Lots of different things. And it's almost like my menu. But I want you to pick a list, pick from your list and reward for yourself for keeping to your boundary when you do, because I know you will, but reward yourself for that. So that is 3 things to build and stick to your boundaries is to first tie it to a value, something that you care about. Second is set up your system. And third is celebrate consistency. Remember back to that imagery that I shared with you earlier, that heart, those are your values in the center. We want to wrap our arms around those by creating those boundaries. And the epitome of self-value and worth is holding space for your own boundaries, prioritizing them, caring for them, right? We're pouring ourselves into so many different places, into people, into organizations, into our teams. And what I find is that, people, especially women, like we're taking on the world, right? And usually we cut into our time for ourselves, for our balance. And what I will say is this is where you have to be more ruthless than ever. Some of the women that I'm coaching that are doing it really, really well, they are working less hours because that time has to come from somewhere. But guess what? On the other side, they're more focused when they are at work, right? Absolutely. They're more fulfilled when they are because they can think clearly. They have held that time for themselves. All of those will pour into all of your other boundaries. So I love that you have that realization, Margot. You are not alone. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing either. I think you start small. So what is that one thing you can do every day? One thing that you can do every day? Is it the walk outside? Is it what is it? And establish that for yourself. Some of those things that we have, the patriarchy is real. I'm not going to say that it's not, but some of the things that we might be telling ourselves might be self-induced too. Like I had to be there. I had to show my face. I had to be in these meetings. I had to be the one to do it. I didn't. And I wish that I learned some of that earlier in my career, to be honest. I didn't do some of these things until I was an executive at a Fortune 50 company, right? And so what I would say is you probably have more power than you think you do. And so try out something, see what happens. I had a client in my group coaching program that she started scheduling different appointments and didn't tell anybody. It was earth shattering. She was like, I went to the doctor and nobody knew. And I came back and everything was fine, right? Like instead of scheduling that to extend her day, she did it during the work day, right? I use quotation marks. And so something just as simple as that, she got some time back, right? So some of these boundaries might be as simple as, setting a schedule that you always stick to in the morning to get control of your day instead of, jumping into something and be in reactive mode. Sometimes it might even be setting time for strategic planning. It could be that. It could be a boundary around a limiting belief that you have. It doesn't always have to be about time. But I would say to try and at least start with one thing, start small, celebrate that as you're building the muscle. It's building a muscle of getting good at this. And I'll also tell you that once you get it, I'm kind of obsessed with boundaries at this point. I'm like, okay, what else can I put a boundary around, right? All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I want to remind you of a couple of things before we leave our time together today. All right. So I hope that this is what you got out of our session today. First, you've gotten some clarity on your values. We've defined success for at least one value in a deeper way, maybe a couple, right? And then we've built a boundary, and now you have a system. You know the ins and outs of that system and how to keep it. You might need to refine the system. You might need to try a couple of things here and there, but the next and most important thing for you to do is to take action. All right, so if you haven't already, I want you to go grab the book. It's called Values First, How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want. It's available on Amazon right now for Kindle for 99 cents. And then the workbook that I mentioned, you can find it at thecatchgroup.com/valuesfirst. It's a free download of over 50 pages. So it has some of the things that we did today in a workbook form that you can print out, or you can fill it out digitally. It's a fillable PDF. So I hope that you're able to take action on at least one thing that you learned today. And if you can do me another favor of telling at least one other person about one nugget that you had today to keep you held accountable, maybe even grab somebody from this group, a new network, or a buddy that you haven't seen in a while, and have a conversation about this. And I just want to thank you so much for spending time with us here today, and I'll throw it back over to Linda.
Laura,